Good morning. Welcome to our Farmamerica Drainage Water Management Project webinar for 2025. We appreciate you choosing to spend time with us today. Today we'll be talking about our exciting Discovery Farms controlled drainage project at Farmamerica. We will give a background for the project, get an update on Farmamerica activities, and hear about the water and soil health data collected through the project. My name is Tim Raditz. I will be the moderator for the day. I am the coordinator for the Discovery Farms Minnesota program. A few housekeeping things before we get started. First, we encourage questions and discussion from you. Please put content-related questions in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. Please put questions related to logistics, technology issues, agenda questions, and other logistics into the chat box, and we will address those separately from the Q&A for the speakers. Each speaker will answer questions at the end of their talk. There might be some time at the end of the session for questions, but we encourage you to ask questions right away during the speaker time, and also use the Q&A feature to vote for questions that resonate with you. Discovery Farms was first established in Wisconsin in 2000. It was formed in response to a call from the agriculture and environmental communities for enhanced on-farm research in the area of water quality. Farmers volunteered to host water quality monitoring stations to better understand the dynamics of runoff timing, the impact of agricultural management, and the influence of weather. Over the years, programs have been added in Arkansas, Minnesota, and Vermont. Representatives from each state pursue the determination of Discovery Farms, which is a registered trademark because of the positive response to the work of the program from farmers, farm advisors, agency partners, and water quality stakeholders. Each Discovery Farms program has to include 3 pillars of Discovery Farms, including farmer leadership, credible water quality research, and communication of results. The Farmamerica Drainage Water Management Project was initiated in the fall of 2022 and is led by the Minnesota Agricultural Water Resources Center, along with partners from the Discovery Farms Minnesota program, Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and Farmamerica. Other agricultural and industry partners, including the Minnesota Corn Growers Association, Prinsco, and Ellingson Drainage, were essential for getting the project started. Also, a grant opportunity from the USDA, NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, made this project possible. We also have partnered with Minnesota State University Mankato to conduct soil health evaluations at the project. So we want to thank and acknowledge all of these partners. Without their support and dedication, this project would not be possible. The goal of this project is to increase adoption of drainage water management in southern Minnesota by focusing on demonstration, education, and outreach to farmers, agricultural contractors, and conservationists on the specific best management practice. Drainage water management sites are being demonstrated and evaluated alongside conventional drainage practices. This allows for a better understanding of the water quality, economic, and soil health advantages of drainage water management. Drainage water management is a conservation practice that involves strategically controlling the timing and volume of water discharged from agricultural drainage systems, aiming to improve water quality, enhance soil conditions, and potentially increase crop yields. Drainage water management uses water control structures like inline structures or water gate valves to manage the water table within a field, allowing farmers to retain water in the soil profile when needed and drain it when excess moisture is present. By controlling the timing and volume of drainage water management can reduce the amount of nitrates and other nutrients that flow into downstream water bodies. Drainage water management can improve soil aeration, reduce erosion, and promotes healthy soil structure. By optimizing water availability and soil conditions, drainage water management can potentially lead to higher crop yields, especially in drier years. Okay, let's get started with the speakers. Our first speakers of the day are Jessica Rollins and Taylor Ulrich. Jessica and Taylor will be giving us a Farmamerica update and information on the agricultural practices used on the monitoring field. Jessica Rollins has been the executive director of Farmamerica for almost 9 years. She grew up on a crop and livestock farm in southeast Minnesota. Her previous work in public relations, marketing, and agriculture education helps her manage Farmamerica, raise funds, and build partnerships so the organization can connect thousands of Minnesotans each year to the story of agriculture. She and her husband raised their 2 daughters on a farm near Pemberton. Taylor Ulrich is a precision ag consultant with Crystal Valley. She graduated from South Dakota State University in 2020 with a major in precision ag and a minor in agronomy. She has been with Crystal Valley for almost 5 years. Go ahead, Jessica and Taylor.
All right. Hopefully you can hear me okay, Tim.
Yep, I can hear you great.
All right, I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. All right, there we go.
Looks
I should be
great.
able to see my screen.
Yep.
So just a quick overview of Farmamerica in case some of you are not overly familiar with us, and in case you're wondering what we're up to last year and what's coming up this year for 2025, then I'll hand it over to Taylor and she can talk about the research that Crystal Valley is doing in partnership with Farmamerica. So first, our mission at Farmamerica is to connect Minnesotans to that evolving story of agriculture. We do that through hands-on experiences, partnerships, and community engagement. We were established in 1978 by Minnesota legislators as the Minnesota Agricultural Interpretive Center. At that same time, they created 2 other interpretive centers to celebrate some of the larger industries in Minnesota. They have an iron ore interpretive center and also a forestry interpretive center up in northern Minnesota. So we operate as a 501c3 nonprofit, gaining financial support through donors, memberships, grants, some of our farmland crops that y'all talk about in just a moment. And we receive a small amount of funding from the state still. So those are your tax dollars. And thank you as Minnesotans for that support. And then we also do charge a small admission for all of our events and fun activities that we offer. So this is just a quick slide to show that we own 360 acres on that left side. That chunk is where the controlled water drainage research plot is. Hey, look, I spelled research incorrectly on there. That's a fun little thing. So that's the main section we'll be talking about. Taylor's going to touch on the research that they're doing on the northern fields that we own. Altogether, we have 250 acres of farmland, and then the additional part is part of that little walking path. You see that historic trail on the bottom half of this slide. And that's where we have different historic buildings to help people understand what agriculture used to be like. And then they can return to our visitor center and have some exhibits about today's agriculture and what's happening in the world around them. So these are just some adorable pictures of fun things that are happening, how beautiful our site is in all of the seasons. We do have 3 full-time employees and 4 part-time employees. We added a lot of new events in 2024 and in 25. We opened our family-friendly corn maze in the evenings in October with volunteer support from 4 local FFA chapters. They were the boots on the ground to make the evenings flow, and then in exchange for their help, we did share the proceeds from that evening with them for their FFA chapters. So in addition to a lot of the traditional programs most of you are familiar with, we added some new ones. Like I said, here's a whole bunch of words. A couple I will highlight is that we received grant funding that allowed us to start a hydroponic garden in our visitor center, which has played a really big part in our summer camps, allowing students to taste, smell, and compare herbs and vegetables while learning about a different style of farming from what they would see outside with our row crops. We also will use the produce from those hydroponic gardens for our farm to fork dinners, which we started in 24 and we will continue now in 2025. Those farm to fork dinners are helping us connect farmers and producers from a 75-mile radius with consumers who are interested in good food and discovering how they can support their neighbors. So a couple other fun things that I want to point out as you look at these words. The world's largest U.S. flag kite will be flown at Farmamerica on July 5th. It is 10,000 square feet big when it's up in the air. And that's the same size as our visitor center building. So it's going to be a really magnificent sight to see that US flag flown on our grounds. So be sure to mark your calendars to come out for that. And another neat thing that we started was a pizza and puzzles evening. So while it's not an educational event, it still brings the community together for a fun little jigsaw puzzle competition, 500-piece puzzle. And we just did this activity last weekend, and the winning team completed that 500-piece puzzle in less than 40 minutes. So yay for them. If you want to compete against them, we're doing our next one in May. So you have to check our website to see those dates. But an event like that, just it provides some additional revenue for us to do our educational programs, and it exposes a new demographic to our site. So hopefully they come back when we have other actual educational activities going on. Some cute photos. The national presidential turkeys, Peach and Blossom, were raised in the Northfield, Minnesota area last year. And then they went to DC last fall to be pardoned by the former president. And now they live with us at Farmamerica for the rest of their lives, which is really exciting. So we welcomed them home on Black Friday last year with a 5K fun run and waffle breakfast. And if you want to come see them, you can stop by during our summer hours or join us toward the end of April when we have our Barnyard Babies event, and the turkeys will be helping us welcome all of our farm animals to the site for the season. Um, Also noteworthy is our fall festival had record attendance. We had over 1,300 visitors on site in just 5 hours. So, sliding ahead. We started a new summer kids club membership program last summer, and that offered different agricultural themed activities each week that we provided for kids to come with their adults, and they could either do the activity on site or take it home with them. And then each week we had one specific special speaker come in and highlight whether it was how to shear sheep or how to be a beekeeper or talk about agricultural drones. So kids could do a make and take, and then also just learn a little bit more about agriculture in our summer setting. We actually hosted more school-age childcare groups last summer for day camps than we ever have before in our 40-some years of existence, which is really neat to see the area schools coming up together and bringing their youth here to focus on livestock and plants. We do still offer our field trips for 3rd through 5th grade students, and the demand for these actually gets greater every year. Sadly, last year, we were forced to actually turn away some schools who wanted to experience the story of agriculture because we simply didn't have the staff or the volunteer capacity to offer any additional field trip days. So it's great that we're growing. It's a bummer that we can't grow as fast as our audience wants us to. This slide just illustrates that field trip growth from 2022 to 23 and 24. And we expect it to kind of cap out at that 2,200 mark because that's about what we're able to manage right now. So all of these mean lots of activities and lots of visitors. So we increased our attendance by 47% in 2024. That's an incredible record for us. And we certainly did not accomplish that alone. We had a lot of people in the background helping us make that possible. I included the map just to kind of show you the general radius of where we're drawing folks from, but we do have a decent amount of national visitors as well who are in the area. So that's our attendance. And we did that, accomplish all those great things with our volunteers, our board members, and business partners who donated well over 1,000 hours of their time to help us reach these goals. And commercial again, if you want to know more about volunteering at Farmamerica, you can join us for a complimentary farm to fork breakfast on April 4th to learn about some of our volunteer opportunities. This slide just shows our community gardens being used both by youth during those summer day camps, and then also the lush garden that Waseca community adults had been using as well. We like to stay connected with the community by offering a lot of different opportunities for them to be out on site. Another one that's maybe not as educational, but still brings people to our space is we do host a Red Cross blood drive every few months. And even our students who are part of our MEA day camp in October participated in giving back to the community. This 2 day fall break day camp for 38 students allowed them to make 50 sack lunches for area farmers in the fields. And then a farm member came and picked up the lunch at Farmamerica and took it out to the field to those farmers. So those students could meet someone connected, like a real farmer connected to the farm. And then they also made 6 fleece tie blankets for children at the Ronald McDonald House in Rochester and the Bethlehem Inn in Waseca. So it's a neat opportunity for kids who maybe don't have a farm background to spend a couple days with us and also give back to their community and understand what that means. With support from Crystal Valley and AgCo, our 2024 crop was harvested for free using a new Fendt combine, which was a really neat collaboration. It allowed AgCo's team to kind of train on that brand new piece of equipment, and it allowed our fields to be harvested at a very reduced rate. Another neat partnership that we had the opportunity to participate in is we received grant funding from the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation to paint some of our outbuildings at our 1930s farm site. So we're really shabby looking, and with free paint and some community member and volunteer support, we were able to spruce those up quite a bit, just making the place more aesthetically pleasing. Another partnership that has been incredible for us this past year that we will be working through still yet in 2025 is support from the Corn Checkoff and the Minnesota Biofuels Association. So with funding from them, we're adding an ethanol education exhibit and making some neat green updates to our Farmamerica property with some value-added soy products from the soybean checkoff funding. So we added a soy turf putting green to talk about the removal of petroleum from turf. We added soy-backed carpet in our conference room, again, removing that petroleum aspect. And we've switched a lot of our cleaning supplies and soaps over to a soy-based product as well. We will also be using Roof Max to extend the life of the shingles on our one-room schoolhouse, which is a soy oil that can rehydrate shingles, extending the life, like I said, of the shingles. So then what's next? What's up? What's coming up? As we look into Q2, we're going to work to maintain our current audience level of 11,300 people. At this time, we're not sure we want to grow another 47% in this short amount of time, but we definitely want to maintain the attendance that we do have. And we're going to be building some new exhibits, displays about Minnesota dairy, turkey, and prairie lands. We'll continue to seek funding to help us develop our next strategic plan, so we have a good roadmap for the next 20 years. And then we're looking to preserve our iconic red barn that has rotting wood, and hoping to get that resided in the next couple of years as well. And then, of course, we'll continue to have events and lots of opportunities for folks to come out and connect with the story of agriculture in fun, hands-on ways. That is my update about Farmamerica.
Thank you, Jessica. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I do have one question.
Yes.
How do they fly a flag that large?
With several volunteers, like 40 people on the ground have to like hold the strings, and it's also anchored. The strings are then also anchored to like a really large semi truck and trailer.
Wow.
And then the wind has to the wind has to be the perfect speed. So we'll cross our fingers for the right amount of wind and no rain and good audience.
Yeah, I'd imagine it could just take off and be gone.
Yep, that would not be good.
Well, all right. Sounds great. All right, Taylor.
I don't know, Jessica, would you mind putting up that screen again that has the layout of the farmland? Would that be all right? So yeah, Taylor Ulrich with Crystal Valley. We've been working with Farmamerica for 8+ years, doing a lot of research out at their farm here. Trying to connect to tell the story of agriculture to everybody as well that's coming through their doors. So we're very grateful for this partnership. To tell the story and be able to do some research on our side as well. So we've been working with the east side of the road of our research plots for the last 8 years. And then where the drainage project is, we started working with that last year. So this coming year, it will be a corn and soybean rotation. The south half will be soybeans, and that's been strip tilled and has just commercial fertilizer on it. And then the north half will be corn. Some of it will be corn on corn just due to rotation of trying to get the drainage sites to be equal. So that has anhydrous on it and then dry fertilizer as well. Just some of the things that we are working with on that side of the road specifically is we have a lime study. We have the field split in thirds. So the north half of it has ag lime, the middle is no lime, and the east half would have pell lime on it. So um, mainly what we're trying to do is answer a lot of questions that we get from our customers and creating an unbiased um, answer to those with the growers that we're working with. Um, in the past, we've done a lot of research with nitrogen rates, the timing, the amounts, application types. This year, we'll be doing a lot with that as well and be doing sulfur studies also, getting a lot of questions from our growers on how much sulfur should I be putting out, how much should I split, early versus late. Um, we do a lot of research with hybrid plots, so we scatter those throughout the trade territory, but also at Farm America here as well. We have a rather large hybrid plot that goes in. About 60 corn hybrids go in, and at least 50 soybean varieties go in. So very excited about that as well. And then we're also doing a lot of fertility studies out at Farm America, whether that be on the dry side. Or foliar treatments, we're experimenting with those as well. Not necessarily tied to the west side of the road, but we are doing tillage studies at Farm America. Most of the farm is strip tilled, but we do have a tillage study going that has conventional versus strip till, and both of those have cover crops with and without. So just some of the exciting things that we're working with. And yeah, like I said, very excited to be working with this partnership with Farm America.
Thanks for that update, Taylor. One question I had for you on the drainage field that we're working on. I know after the tile was installed in the fall of 2022, we had some ridges out there. So we did some full width tillage to kind of level out those ridges. Is the plan moving forward? Is it just to do a strip till, more of a strip till approach compared to conventional full width tillage?
Yes. So the plan going forward would be that the whole farm would get stripped, be strip till going in the future after those tile ridges are worked down. So
Yes. Okay. Great. Well, thanks for that update, Taylor.
yeah.
All right. Next, we have Scott Madison. He is going to give us an update on water data that has been collected at our drainage water management project. Scott is a hydrologist with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. He was born, raised, and lives near Mankato, Minnesota, and graduated with a biology degree from Minnesota State University, Mankato in 1999. Scott works out of the Mankato, Minnesota Department of Agriculture office and has been with the agency since 2010. Scott works with the Discovery Farms Minnesota program, and his role involves setting up and maintaining monitoring stations on the farms, compiling and analyzing the flow and water quality data, and training local partners on monitoring procedures. Go ahead, Scott.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you fine. You want to
All
share
right.
share your screen?
Yep.
All
All
right,
right.
looks
It's
good.
okay. Good. All right. Yeah. So today I'm going to be talking about the field that we've been monitoring for the past 2 years. at Farmamerica. It's a 120-acre field. It was retiled in 2022. So it's corn and soybeans the past 2 years. So it's the northern half is one crop type. So in 22, this was the northern part was corn, and then it was soybeans in 24, and then it was opposite in the south. And on here I have a dash line showing where that break was. So that I think going forward here, that's going to be moved down to the south a little bit. So we'll have two plots on the southern part of that field that will be in one crop type and two in another. But these first 2 years of data collection, we did have a mixture for one of these watersheds. So yeah, like I mentioned, the field was, the plan was to retile it in 2022. Previously, it had been old clay tile, not as dense. It was shallow. It wasn't functioning as well as they would have liked. So the plan was to retile it in 2022. And with that, there was the opportunity to design the tile in a way that allowed for controlled drainage or drainage water management. So that year, that summer of 22, we worked with Ecosystem Services Exchange out of Iowa, and they developed a tile design. So that tile was designed to follow the contours of the slope with a spacing of approximately every 40 feet between laterals. And for our monitoring purposes, the field was split into 4 separate watersheds or our monitoring basins that ranged in size from 15 to up to about 49 acres. This is showing the installation. If you recall back to winter of 22, it was very warm. So they actually were able to do the tile installation in the middle of the winter. This was late December of 22, and the tile installation went into January of 23. Now our plan is to get the equipment installed as quickly as possible in 23 and start monitoring. That was the plan. This is just showing what we're using for structures. We're using agri-drain level control structures. So those are structures that are installed at the outlet of each of those watersheds. And then we can use stop logs installed down the center of those structures to control the water level in the field. And those are shown on that map as those dark orange stars. Now to control the water level across a larger portion of the field so that you have a better impact, we installed water gate valves. So what these are automatic float operated head pressure valves. You can purchase them for up 8-inch or 12 inches of lift. We're using the 12-inch lift ones, but those are shown on the map as those blue stars on there. So with using those, we get where those are located, that'll hold back another foot water elevation. So we can have, impact a larger portion of the field when we start managing the water level. I should mention that we're just coming out of our calibration period. So the first 2 years here, we ran everything open. We're trying to compare out these 4 watersheds to see how they flow and what the data looks like for nutrients. So as I mentioned, the plan was to get out there as soon as possible in 2023 and get the equipment installed. Well, we picked one of the snowiest winters in recent record, 72 inches of snowfall in Waseca. So it made installation very difficult. Of course, all of that melted in March. Most of that melted in March. And that's when we wanted to get the install done. We get an A for effort, but we got some temporary equipment installed by the end of March. But as you're going to see, most of it, the equipment wasn't installed until May. I just threw that bottom chart on there to show you how the last 2 winters compared. We've kind of gone the other way now where we've had some drier winters with much less snowfall. This is from the Research and Outreach Center at the University of Minnesota in Waseca, which is only about, I think it's 5 miles straight east of this field. So yes, most of the equipment was installed in early May 2023. You can see in the left image there, that's an agri-drain structure. And then we've got one of these equipment shelters located next to each of those 4 structures. This is showing the monitoring equipment setup. If you look at that upper right-hand image, it's looking down an agri-drain structure. So what we're using is a V-notch stop log. It's got a steel plate on there that we measure the water level through that V-notch, and that's recorded in a data logger in our equipment shelter, and the data logger converts that water level to a flow rate. Now, we're using automated ISCO brand automated samplers for the water sample collection. And those are triggered by the data logger. It's flow incremented sampling. So the higher the flow rate, the faster that sampler will trigger. Every time it triggers, it'll put about a half a cup of water into a 2-gallon jug, which is shown in that lower left image. When that bottle is full, or at minimum once a week, we go out and collect. I manage this site, so I'm actually out there about every week when the tiles are flowing during the spring and summer. But those will be collected, shaken up, put into laboratory bottles, and then those bottles are shipped to Minnesota Valley Testing Laboratory in New Ulm, Minnesota. And since Discovery Farm started in 2011, we've used the same laboratory and the same methods for all farms, all years. So we're trying to be consistent in what we're doing. Now at the lab, those samples are run for total suspended solids, total nitrate, total Kelvin nitrogen, ammonia, total phosphorus, orthophosphorus, and chloride. So for weather, if you look in that upper left-hand image, we do have weather instruments. We're measuring rainfall, air temperature and humidity, wind speed and direction, and solar radiation. And we also, at 2 of these sites, have soil and temperature probes installed at a 6-inch and 24-inch depths. And all this data, all this continuous data is measured every 15 minutes. And except for rainfall, rainfall is recorded every minute that it occurs. So I'm going to get into the precipitation data first, which is very interesting because last year we had probably one of the wettest, well, it was the wettest early summer period on record. So this is looking at the last 2 years. First of all, I want to mention that we work on the water year. So the water year is October 1st through September 30th. So when you're looking through these slides and you see WY23, that would be October 22 through September of 23. Now the 30-year normal for this site is just under 38 inches. If you look at the blue bars there in 23, you can see I mentioned we had a really snowy winter and quite a bit of melt in the spring. And then we had a very wet May. I think May 15th, we had a big rain, and then it just shut off. It was that the rest of the summer and the fall was very dry. The tiles turned off. And then we get to spring of 24. We didn't have a lot of snow. And then we had tremendous amounts of rain in May and June. And then again, it kind of shut off again. After June of 24, we went into a drier period. So it's been a tale of wet and dry periods the last 2 years here. And looking at this, you can see that we had over 10 inches more precipitation in water year 24 than 23. I really want to emphasize how wet 24 was. This is looking at June of 2024 from the Minnesota State Climatology Office. It's showing June precipitation. It's based on 1,000 observer stations across Minnesota. And you can see Farmamerica there is that star, and it's just showing how it's, right where all that rainfall occurred in June of 24. Over 10 inches of precipitation for much of that area. I'm going to go back to this one for 1 second. So I went back and I actually looked at the climatology website. They've got data recorded and they have model data going back all the way to 1891. So I looked at that and I looking at 2 consecutive months. If you looked at May and June of 24, Farmamerica had just under 20 inches of rainfall in 2 months. And kind of all that purple area, a lot of that purple area had that amount. So going back to 134 years, this was the highest precipitation May and June period on record. In fact, if you look at all months, it was the second wettest 2 month period. The only 2 months that had a higher total precipitation was it August and September of 2016. So it just really shows you how wet it was during that period. So I'm going to be showing now drainage or runoff. I use those words interchangeable. But what it is, it's the amount of water that we measure through the agri-drain structure, and then you divide it by the watershed. So it's the depth of water that would cover that watershed in inches. In 23, that northern site, that temporary equipment I talked about, we had issues with it at the northernmost site. So we did not get monitoring starting until May of that year. So I'm not going to have that data on these slides for 23. But I guess what I kind of wanted to point out here is you can see that we had about double the drainage for those plots in 24 as in 23. In 23 ranging from 6 to just under 9 inches, but in 24 just under 12 inches to 18.5 inches of drainage. The other thing to note is, all 4 of these watersheds are in the same 120 acre field, but they're not all equivalent. There's considerable difference in the amount of water that flows through those in the drainage. Over 5 inches between that N2 plot and South SW plot. On the bottom there, I have just what the average for all Discovery Farm sites are across all the years, all locations. We average about 5.25 inches of drainage through tile drainage. All right, so looking at water year 23, the 2 months of April and May accounted for 87% of the flow. And then in water year 24, 81% of the flow was just in May and June. So we've seen a lot of the flow occur in a short duration. And then you look on there, August through February, we've had almost no flow at these sites. This is a hydrograph for the 4 sites and showing 15-minute flow data. So it kind of shows the same as the monthly data, but you can see how how they respond to storms and how we started there in spring, July or April of 23. There was flow, but then it ceased by mid-June. It was pretty much done with. Then we had several months of no flow, and then until spring of 24. And then again by early August, the tiles were dry, and we haven't had any flow at any of them since August of last year. Now, with the record precipitation last year, it also led to the most drainage that we've ever seen for Discovery Farms as a program. This is looking at all the tile drainage sites. So it's 11 farms, 15 different watersheds, looking at water years 2011 when Discovery Farms Minnesota started up and through last year. So this is all across Minnesota, but it's 1,079 months of data just sorted in order by date. And I just wanted to emphasize, the amount of drainage that we saw last year at Farmamerica was, it was the most that we have seen because it was the most amount of precipitation that we have ever monitored at a site. Now, the important part about this first 2 years is for us is comparing these plots. So going forward, the idea is that N1, that northernmost watershed, will be managed with controlled drainage or drainage water management, but not N2. That will be kept as it is, just free flow. And the same thing with SW to the south there, that will be managed, but not SE. So that's what we're comparing is N1 to N2. And we want to make sure there's a good relationship in the drainage. And we've seen an excellent relationship at both pairings. So this means that we should be able to get some really good data going forward, or good comparison going forward when we start managing one of those plots in each portion of those fields to see if that slope changes, if we can hold back some of the water where we're managing those fields. Now I'm going to get into the water quality data that's been collected. This is total suspended solids, which is a measure of sediment and organic matter. This is concentration, so average full weighted mean concentration, which is the average concentration of all the water that was measured for each year at each of those 4 plots. And these values are very low. We've got several farms where we monitor both surface runoff from the field and tile drainage. And on average, we see about 95% of the sediment come off the surface of the field. So in general, TSS through tile drainage is very low, and these numbers are low. This is yield, so it's in pounds per acre of TSS. On there we have the bottom, what the average is, what we see for surface sites, which is about 300 pounds per acre as compared to tile. And, you know, water year 24, those values do look, based on the scale I used, they look kind of high, but a lot of that's just due to the volume of water. There was just so much water carrying, you know, a little bit of sediment that it makes those values look a little higher. This is total phosphorus. I think on average for Discovery Farm tile sites, we average around 0.1 milligrams per liter. So this is in line with what we've seen across most farms. The values were very low last year because most of this, or in 23, because the samples we collected were more weighted towards base flow. We didn't have as many storms. Typically, when you're going to see phosphorus move through tile drainage is during those really big storms, the peak of the hydrographs. Of what you're seeing here, around 2/3 of that total phosphorus is dissolved phosphorus. And then this is total phosphorus yield. Long term, we see about 0.1 pounds per acre through tile drainage at all farms, compared to about 0.7 pounds per acre from surface runoff. So we see roughly about 85% of the total phosphorus from a field go off the surface as compared to tile drainage. Now, where it reverses here is when we talk about nitrogen. The primary pathway for the nitrate we measured is through the tile drainage as compared to surface. Approximately, if we look at nitrate, about 95% of the nitrate we measure is in the tile drainage as compared to surface runoff at farms where we're monitoring both. So at Farmamerica here, this is showing all the forms of total nitrogen that we measure, but 98% of that is in the nitrate form. So when you look at these numbers, you're pretty much looking at nitrate. Now, looking at 23, you can see that N2 watershed, that was where I mentioned earlier, where the crop boundary line was kind of right through the middle of that. So that's a mixture of corn and soybeans. And then the other 2 fields were in soybeans. But we really consistently across all 4 of those watersheds in 23, the concentrations weren't a whole lot different. They were, you know, 10 to 12 milligrams per liter. So they were very similar. Going into 2024, that N1, which had been corn the previous year, and I don't have the concentration on 23, but it was similar to those other ones. So it didn't really change. Went up maybe 1 or 2 milligrams per liter. And then that mixed field N2, that went up a little bit, 4 milligrams per liter. But the big difference we saw was in the corn watersheds, SW and SE, that were soybeans in 23, they were 12, 11 milligrams per liter, and they jumped up to 20, 25 milligrams per liter. Total nitrogen yield, on average, across all years, we see about 21 pounds of total nitrogen move through tile drainage in a year. Looking here, you can see in 23 that we saw a range of about 15 pounds up to 24 pounds in those watersheds. And then in 24, we saw quite a bit of a difference. The soybean N1 was 36 pounds per acre. That mixture field was 40.1 pounds per acre. And then the corn SW and SE were 86 and 81 pounds per acre. And the majority, 80% of that loss in total nitrogen occurred during that May and June period in 2024. One thing we started adding to Discovery Farm sites a couple of years ago were nitrate sensors. So we have continuous nitrate measured at a 15-minute value for all 4 of these plots. And it's kind of interesting looking at last year. The black on there is the soybean field, and then the blue is that field that was a mixture, and the green were the ones that were in corn. I believe the fertilizer for the corn plots was applied in mid-April. And I wanted to zoom into one area here because what was very interesting is looking at that May period around May 20th. You can see how the nitrate concentration jumped up quite a bit. That was the first really large drainage event of last year. And what's interesting is looking at that the corn plot or the soybean plot during that storm. If you look in the bottom there, that's the flow data in blue and gray. Here's my cursor. So yeah, this is the flow data for these 3 plots. May 20th, May 21st is here. But you can see the soybean plot, it jumped up about 2 milligrams per liter from that storm. But in the corn plots, it jumped up about 15 milligrams per liter. And what's surprising to me is that was in a 15-minute period. So it was very quick. Before we had these nitrate sensors, we were collecting that composite sample that represented several days or up to a week. So you can't really see this detail. As I mentioned, the comparison between the watersheds is really good. So Reed Christensen from our office, Department of Ag, he works with statistics, and he did this for us. He ran statistics to see what kind of detectable difference we would be able to monitor going forward. So based on that, for example, in those comparisons, we should be able to detect up to if the percent difference going forward is more than 2%, we should be able to detect that for drainage. And then you can see the other things on there for nitrate yield and concentration for nitrate. So the drainage water management phase, the calibration phase is over with. That ended last fall. And we're in the treatment phase now. So in November of last year, we put additional stop logs in the outlets of that N1 and SW watersheds, where you can see here we added about 3 feet of stop logs. So the drainage water management plan, it will be after harvest, boards will be brought within 12 inches below the ground surface. So that's what we did last fall on this N1 and SW watersheds. And then coming up here this spring, 2 weeks prior to field work, the boards will be pulled out, pretty much be going back to what we were without anything installed. It'll be at least 3 feet below the ground surface. After planting and field work, we'll come back about halfway up. So we'll be about 2 feet below the ground surface at those structures. And then if necessary, 2 weeks prior to harvest, we'll again pull the boards out to make sure everything's dry in the field. Most of the time we don't see tile drainage in the fall, so it may not be necessary. I believe going forward, I think I'm a little unclear. I think this year the field will be corn, or maybe it is a mixture of corn and soybeans. But beyond that, it would be what I mentioned, where 1/2 the watershed break or the crop break will be right here. So the 2 northern watersheds will be in either corn or soybeans, and the 2 southern will be in the other crop type. So I'm going to completely shift gears here now. Nothing related to that. But we also had another project going on related to this one where we're monitoring a surge pond located downstream of the Farmamerica field. So the yellow on here is the 120 acre Farmamerica field. This dashed line is an approximate line. I just kind of drew it in. I don't have the exact location, but this is County Ditch 19 tile main, which was improved from a 18-inch main to a 24-inch main in 2021, I believe. So with that increased capacity, there was a surge pond installed at the outlet of that county main to help mitigate increased peak flows. So you can see here we have about a 430 acre watershed now that drains to that county ditch 19. And then we're monitoring at the outlet there. So what we're looking at is the flow going into the pond, the surge pond, and the flow going out. And so this, we've been working with Steve Schiefert. This is he's a landowner out there. So we monitoring the flow in and out, and then also we have nitrate sensors located at both of those locations. Now the pond wasn't designed to reduce nitrate, but we're looking to see if there is some denitrification occurring and some reduction there. This is looking at the inlet structure. So this is the outlet of that 2-foot county main. We have a flow sensor installed just on the upstream side of that trash guard. And then that white PVC in the stream here, this is what's holding the nitrate sensor. And then at the outlet, there is a 18-inch. So the idea is you have a 2-foot culvert coming in, but you have an 18-inch coming out. So it's going to reduce the peak flow rate. So this is at the outlet of that concrete culvert. We also have a flow probe inserted up into the culvert. And then we've got a stainless steel box here where we have a nitrate sensor. Now, I don't have a lot of data to present for this first year of monitoring because we had a lot of issues with the equipment. We had sensors breaking, and we had unusual things like for a while there, we had clay coming down the tile line, a broken tile clay, and it was covering the flow sensor. And so that was kind of unusual. But the biggest issue we had was with a beaver. For the months of June into July, building a dam at the outlet, which really messed up the outlet monitoring. So some images here of showing that beaver activity. So this was where that outlet equipment is installed, and this is after pulling that out. But yeah, we struggled with that for a while there. So the blue line on this one is showing the water level at that inlet monitoring location. And the yellow line on there is the approximate spillway elevation. So when the blue line goes above the yellow, that would be when water is flowing through that spillway that's near the outlet. And so the beaver really had an impact on our monitoring when we got into late May and into June and July. So we really don't have good data at the outlet during that time period. So on this one, this is showing, so the black line there is the inlet. We do have good flow data and nitrate data at the inlet the entire time period. But at the outlet, really only have good data up until late May. That top chart on there, you can see the flow coming in is the black versus the green is what's going out. And then on the bottom, you have the black as the inflow nitrate and the green as the outflow nitrate. So when we work up the flow and the nitrate together, we come up with about a 4 to 5% reduction in nitrate concentrate or nitrate load. We would expect that to increase as the summer goes along and as water temperature increases. So we're hoping going forward here, when we can get a complete year of data, that we'll be able to track that. But looking at grab samples we collected near the outlet inlet later in the summer, it looked like it was more like a 8 to 10% reduction in concentration. So as I mentioned, the main purpose of this surge pond is to reduce the peak flow, which it appears to be doing. There's the peak flow coming into the pond is in that range of about 25 cubic feet per second, but the peak range at the outlet, the peak flow at the outlet was around 10 cubic feet per second. Now all the data, all the continuous data that I've talked about today is available online, mda.onerain.com. If you go on there, along the top, there'll be a dashboards button right here. Click on that. Then there'll be separate projects listed. Click on Farmamerica Discovery Farms Minnesota, and that'll contain all of the weather and flow and continuous nitrate data for both the tile sites and also the pond site. So with that, I thank you for your time, and be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Scott. So the excellent summary of some of the water quality work that's been going on out there. I bet you didn't think that, training in water quality would lead you to some issues with wildlife biology and the beavers, but here you are. Do you have any recommendations for beavers?
Do I?
Okay. Yeah.
No, I don't. I'm not a beaver expert. No.
All right. Well, we'll keep monitoring that Q&A box in case any water quality questions come up. We'll pass them along to you. Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, our last speaker, last but certainly not least, is Dr. Mark Bowen. Mark will be giving an overview of soil health data collected at this project. Mark is an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology and Geography and co-director of the Earth Systems Laboratory at Minnesota State University, Mankato. Mark is a physical geographer with a primary emphasis on soils and soil variability across landscapes. His research has two primary themes: utilizing records preserved within soils to reconstruct natural environmental change and landscape evolution over thousands of years, and two, examine historical to modern impacts to soils and soil health. His research is focused on soils of the Great Plains of the central United States, particularly within agricultural landscapes, and he is especially interested in records preserved in depressional wetlands, for example, prairie potholes. So take it away, Mark.
All right, thanks, Tim, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. So before we get going, I want to give a big shout out and kind of a thanks to I had a graduate student assisting me very heavily on this project, and she's here today. So Miss Ellie Hurdle did a lot of the actual lab work that you see today and a lot of the data analysis. So without her, this project would not have been possible. So thanks for all your work, Ellie. And she's actually going to be defending her thesis on Monday. And if all goes well, she'll be graduating at the end of the semester. But without further ado, let's jump into the project. So here's an overview map, and the red dots here represent the locations that we collected soil samples from. So we collected them collected soil cores. The fields are dominated by three general soil types. There's the Glencoe series, Webster series, both of which are considered hydric soils. And then we have the Nicollet series, which is a non-hydric soil. So to make sure that we had good spatial representation of the soil variability, three cores were collected from each soil type from each field. And then I didn't get involved in this project until 2023, so the tile drainage had already been installed. Ideally, we would have I would have been able to collect some cores before installation, but since that wasn't possible, we use a common practice in soil geography, which is the space for time switch, in which I can't go back in time and get those soil cores. And so I collected soil cores from an undrained field just immediately to the east with somewhat similar management practice history, so that the east field here is undrained, and we will compare the undrained soils to the drained soils in this talk. So soil cores were collected using a hydraulic coring machine. This is the machine on site, and this is Ellie collecting some soil cores. So we collect cores by pushing a hollow metal barrel with a clear plastic liner into the ground and just extracting it, pulling the now filled liner out of the metal barrel, sealing it up, and taking it back to the lab for analysis. All the cores were collected in early March of 2024. So following that very dry, very little snow throughout the 2023 into 2024 winter. So we were able to get on the site pretty easily and had a pretty good job retrieving the cores. Cores have a 2.5-inch diameter, and they extended to about 4 feet deep. And with 3 cores from 3 soil types in each field, that's 9 cores per field. We had the 4 drained fields plus the undrained field, so about 45. We actually only got 44 cores because the coring machine broke right before collecting the last core. So actually, that should be 44 cores. We were shooting for 45. So we collected the cores again in early March of 2024, sealed them, brought them back to the Earth Systems lab. It's the lab that I work in on the Minnesota State campus. And so the first thing we did was pass the cores through a magnetic susceptibility sensor. I'll talk about that more in a little bit, why we analyze magnetic susceptibility. Then we opened the cores. We laid them all out by soil series. So we described all the Glencoe soils first, then all the Webster, then all the Nicollet. Presumably they're going to be similar. So that's why we described them that way. And so that is Ellie describing, completing some core descriptions. So once we analyze magnetic susceptibility, we cut the liners open, clean the faces, and then just do standard core descriptions following the USDA protocols. And so recording things like horizons, how clear their horizon boundaries are, thickness of the horizons, their color, the structure, their consistence, a few other properties, hydric soil indicators, things like that. And the hope is that this will be a long-term project. We will be monitoring soils and how soils change over a several-year period. And so the core descriptions just kind of provide that qualitative-ish description of soil properties, and then we'll just manage that over time, in particular, like how the surface horizon or how the A horizon changes over time, and then see if we see any changes in the subsurface as well. We then took all the cores and divided them into 10-centimeter intervals, and I apologize if you're not familiar with the metric system. We generally use the metric system in my lab, so 30 centimeters is about a foot, so we're looking at a little bit less than like probably about 5 inches intervals is what we slice the core into. And so we ended up with like 10 samples for each core extending to 1 meter or 100 centimeters. So slice them up into 10-centimeter intervals. Of the cores, we kept 1 set separate because they needed to be heated to measure moisture content and bulk density. You have to heat the cores to above the boiling point of water. So we heated them to 105 degrees Celsius, which is a little over 220 degrees Fahrenheit. But then for a lot of other samples, you don't want to heat them or it'll alter the composition of the soil. So we took, of the 3 cores collected in each field, 1 was separate for bulk density and moisture content, and then 2 of the cores were combined to create composite samples to give us more of an average of the soil health for those soil series per field. So for the bulk density samples, we weighed them right after we would describe them, and then immediately slice them up so they were still field moist. Weighed them while they were still field moist. Put them in an oven, 105 degrees, a little over 220 Fahrenheit, for at least 2 days to remove all the water. Reweigh it. Just take the dry weight divided by the wet weight, and that gives you the percent moisture content. And then we divide by the dry weight by the volume of the core, which is just pi. It's the volume for a cylinder, which is pi times radius squared times height. All of those would be about a 7 centimeter radius with a 10 centimeter height. Multiply that by 3.1415, which is pi, and you end up with a volume of around 220 cubic centimeters. And so we just divided all of our dry weights by that volume to get bulk density. For the composite samples, we just put them in Ziploc bags. You can kind of see what they look like in the background here. Open in the lab with a fan blowing on them just to dry them out, air dry them. And then those composite samples were analyzed for percent sand, silt, and clay, so we could get the soil texture. For aggregate stability, which just that's a measure of how well the soil structure or the chunks of soil, the clods, the aggregates, the PEDs, whatever you want to call them, how well they hold together. And then we process the samples for shipping them to Ward Laboratories, which is in Kearney, Nebraska. It's a lab I use quite often for analyses that I don't have the capabilities of in my lab. And so they analyzed about, I think, 22 soil properties, something like that: pH, organic matter content, cation exchange capacity, a range of macro and micronutrients. And so in total, we ended up with 145 samples. There was one core, I believe. A couple of cores didn't extend all the way to a meter, so we're 5 samples short there, and we had all of our samples analyzed for 29 variables. So I'm not going to tell you about all 29 variables today. Don't have time, and I'm sure you don't have the interest in hearing about all of them. So what we did was we took all of our variables and we did statistical analyses on these. I'm not going to bore you with the stats, but if you are a data wonk and you want to hear more about the statistics, feel free to let Tim know, or feel free to email me. I'm happy to share all of the data that we have done and all the analysis we've done. If you're familiar with data analysis, we used RStudio. We took all 29 variables, looking at their average values and then their range in values, and we compared all of the variables. Say, for example, organic matter. We would compare the organic matter content of the drained soils versus the undrained soils. We compared the hydric soils versus the non-hydric. We looked at the soil properties by field, series, depth, as many of these combinations as you could dream up. And so the bulk of the analysis were either what we call paired t-tests, and you do t-tests when you're comparing two factors, so like drained versus undrained. And then when you have more than two factors, so we had 5 different fields, we use analysis of variance. And again, if you want any of those details, I'm happy to give you those, but we're not going to go into those details today. So for this research, kind of have 2 general questions. And the first question is just essentially, what is the state of the soils? How healthy are they? And then my role in this project is essentially monitoring soil health over time, trying to understand how soils change as a result of tile drainage, and then looking at the controlled drainage to see, does the controlled drainage mitigate any of those impacts? Just to see how controlled drainage versus conventional drainage impacts soils over the long term. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can measure, quantify soil health. There's all kinds of these ridiculously complex equations where you can put numerous variables in. I like to keep things simple, and so I really like the Soil Health Institute has a recommendation for soil health monitoring that's 3 variables. And so that's much easier in my mind to kind of understand. And so that's kind of the principles I'm going on for monitoring soil health with this project is a heavy focus on organic matter content. Organic matter highly influences a lot of other soil properties. So that's a critical measure. Aggregate stability essentially gives an indication of how stable that soil is, how susceptible it is going to be to erosion for those fields that are when they're generating runoff. And also aggregate stability helps with root growth. The higher the stability of the aggregates, the easier roots can penetrate through the soil. Plants aren't spending their energy growing the roots, so they can, produce more soy, produce more corn, whatever the case may be. So a high aggregate stability value is a healthier soil. And then carbon mineralization potential is another recommendation. It's a measure of the biological activity within the soil. It's essentially how much carbon the bacteria are breaking down. We didn't have the funding to do this, and so I should mention now that the soil health this research was funded by a one-time grant to me from Minnesota State University. So that allowed us to get out there relatively quickly, paid for all the samples to get collected and analyzed. But again, that was a one-time grant, so we're seeking funding to, and we didn't have funds for the carbon mineralization potential because it's about $15 a sample, and again, we got 145 samples. So looking at, again, just describing, quantifying kind of how healthy the soils are, and then comparing those 4 drained fields to the undrained field to the east to see how have the soils changed in that a little over a year and a half kind of interval from the time the tile drainage starts functioning in kind of the winter of 2023 into then when we collected or winter of 22 into the winter of 23, and then we collected our soil cores in March. So we're looking at like a little less than a year and a half. And again, there's no pre-drainage soil health data from the 4 fields, at least not that I'm aware of. So we are comparing our drained field to the field in the east I showed you on the map previously that is undrained. So looking at how healthy the soils are, so here are some soil cores collected from the 4 fields. The core on the right side is always the east field, and so it generally goes north, middle north, southwest, southeast as we step through. And so you can see, and I didn't include the east field here because this is the undrained one, so we'll see how the east field compares in a little bit. But we can see the organic matter content, and this is in 10-centimeter intervals, the 4 different fields. Scott called them North 1, North 2. I refer to them as North and Middle North. So North would be Scott's North 1, Middle North would be Scott's North 2. I believe Southwest and Southeast were the same. If you look at the organic matter content, it's okay. It's fine. It's a little lower than what you'd expect a native soil, but that's not surprising considering this has been a land that's been in productivity for quite a while. So we've got 5 to 6% organic matter content in the upper few inches, and then drops down to about 1% per interval until we get to about 40 centimeters, and then it just kind of stays relatively low around 2%. So that's common. You expect fairly low organic matter below about 50 centimeters because the roots really don't extend. That'd be almost about 2 feet. Roots don't generally extend. Most roots don't extend that deep. Most of the biological activities in the upper foot to upper 2 feet. So we expect a similar trend to this. So the soils are a little bit, I would say, a little bit depleted in organic matter, but they're in the, quote unquote, healthy range of, you like to see it at least above 4%. Somewhere between 4 and 7% is kind of what the University of Minnesota Extension recommends as like a good normal range. And so, the soils are within that range and show that kind of normal drop off that you'd expect. Looking at aggregate stability ranges from 0 to 1. The higher the value, the more stable the aggregates are. And so if you have values greater than like 0.7, it's considered, a highly stable aggregate. And so if you're familiar with the concept of soil structure, this would indicate a really strong, clear, distinct soil structure that persists and resists disturbance, so that something with a really high aggregate stability, that structure is going to persist even after tillage. Moderate stability, this is you're getting into, you have the potential to break down that soil structure with repeat tillage. And so that's something where when you get into the moderate range, you really need to kind of monitor that you are not, destroying that soil structure. Loss of soil structure, you can lead to a surface sealing. So that when rain falls, it has a really difficult time. We have poorly drained soils as it is. And so if we break that soil structure down, it greatly reduces the infiltration rate, it greatly increases the runoff, and then the potential for soil erosion really goes up. So, and when you're in the moderate range, you really have to kind of monitor to make sure that you are not, completely destroying that soil structure. And then if you're in the low stability range, then you definitely are in danger of getting this positive feedback loop of destroying the structure, sealing the surface, increasing runoff, increasing erosion, which then further depletes the soil. So you see we're in the kind of moderate to getting close to stability, high stability in the upper 10 to 20 centimeters. But as we get lower, that much lower stability, which, okay, that's fine. We don't generally plow, below 40 centimeters. So we're in that moderate range for the surface, which is, the upper 30 centimeters, that upper foot is what we're really concerned with. We're moderate to getting into that low end. So this is something that certainly need to watch going forward, make sure that the soil structure isn't getting completely obliterated. Once that happens, those are referred to as puddled soils, because as you can imagine, water then does not infiltrate the soil, rather it stays puddled on the surface. So organic matter, okay. Aggregate stability, maybe a little less okay, but not bad. If we look at the nutrients, and I am not a nutrient person, I'm much more of a soil physical properties kind of person. I really focus on like soil texture, aggregate stability, bulk density, things like that. So nutrients are certainly not my area of expertise. But there's nothing, big red flags here sticking out as big issues with nutrient depletion or anything like that. Some of these clearly will need, and these were collected all prior to fertilization. So it had been, many months going through winter without fertilization. So they're a little low from an agricultural or agronomic perspective, particularly like nitrate. You might want that up if you're, going into corn. But all the nutrients, the macronutrients are in pretty good shape. And again, I've got data on well over a dozen nutrients. So I figure I'm boring you with enough graphs today. I didn't include everything. So if you have any specific questions, I've got lots and lots of graphs that I can share with you. So if there's anything that you are any variables you are particularly interested in, let me know, and I can certainly go into more detail with those. But the big ones: nitrates, phosphates, potassium, calcium. Looking pretty good. So as far as soil health goes, the soils are pretty good. We need to keep an eye on organic matter, keep an eye on aggregate stability, and we need to hopefully in the future with funding be able to incorporate that carbon mineralization to see how the soil organisms are doing over time. But now looking at how does drainage impact soil? So comparing the 4 drained fields on the west to the undrained field to the east. This is an average then of at least 9 soil samples per field. And the east field then is an average of 6 soil cores. So we've got about 30 cores averaged in the drain fields, and then the average of 6 from the east field, just to, again, give you some perspective. Well, the purpose of tile drainage is to remove water. So you would hope that the drained soils are drier if the tiles are functioning as you hope, and sure enough, the soils are drier. So, that's a good thing. Otherwise, it would be, kind of a non-starter for this project if we weren't getting the moisture out. So the soils are draining and functioning like, the tiles are functioning like you would hope, or at least they were in March of 2024. Now, magnetic susceptibility is a measurement that I typically do, one, because I've got the equipment and it's free and it's non-destructive. So once you measure magnetic susceptibility, you can do anything else you want to it. It doesn't alter it. Magnetic susceptibility is akin to, like, if you were ever a kid or you have kids and, they walk around the house with a magnet and they're sticking the magnet to different things and like, oh, wow, it's stuck to that really hard. And, oh, it doesn't stick to this. So magnetic susceptibility just essentially measures how magnetic the soil is without going into great detail. That in and of itself is not terribly important to soils, or at least to this study as it regards the soils. What magnetic susceptibility does is it provides an indication of how aerated those soils are, how much oxygen is getting into the soil. So as soils become more oxidized or oxygenated, then iron that is within that soil profile will get oxidized or essentially turn to rust. And iron in an aqueous state has very low susceptibility. It essentially doesn't get picked up, and the equivalent of you stick a magnet to it, it won't stick. Whereas once it becomes oxidized, it has a much higher susceptibility generally. So in this study, magnetic susceptibility is a surrogate for, are the soils well aerated? And which is what you hope happens, right? That's one of the purposes of drainage, is to aerate the soils. And we sure enough see that drainage is increasing the soil aeration, and we're seeing that oxidation of iron. So again, tiles are doing, what you want the tiles to do. Looking at organic matter in the drained versus undrained soils. So we do see organic matter has decreased, and it is decreased significantly in just that year to year and a half period in the surface layer, that upper foot. Soils have lost between about 2 to 3% of the organic matter. That's quite a bit of organic matter loss in a fairly short amount of time. That enhanced aeration, which is great for promoting rooting depth and improving, crop growth. Also, enhanced aeration is going to enhance decomposition rate. So it's not an unexpected result. It's the amount is a little higher than expected, but drainage generally will increase organic matter decomposition. So we see that. And so this, 1.5 year study certainly gives me enough pause that need to continue to monitor this long term to make sure that we don't have a profound negative impact, because soil organic matter is an important food source for soil organisms. It is also that glue that really binds soils together and makes soils more stable and keeps those aggregates together following cultivation, or during cultivation. So really important to maintain that organic matter. With the loss of organic matter, we do see that the aggregates are losing their stability. They're becoming more susceptible to degradation. So, again, that organic matter is the glue that holds the individual particles together into clumps or clods or aggregates. And so, this long-term loss of, if this loss of organic matter continues long-term, that could certainly have a kind of a compounding effect on the aggregate stability and the loss of soil structure. So again, these are two factors that we certainly need to continue to monitor going forward. There was no real change. Nitrates, phosphates, there's no significant difference among the 4 fields and among those fields and the drained fields. So nitrates and phosphorus, kind of the big 2 nutrients that most people are concerned with. We're not seeing significant nitrate loss from the soils or significant phosphorus loss. We do see that calcium is quite a bit lower. Copper, which I think this is actually maybe this big spike here is in the east field. about 60 to 70 centimeters deep, there was a sedimentary deposit that was much rockier. And I'm going to assume that this big spike in copper was actually a result of, we would call that the parent material, or essentially the sediment, kind of an inherited property. But we do see a little bit of a copper loss, some zinc, and the big thing with the loss of the calcium is we do see a little bit lower cation exchange capacity. So the ability of the soils to maintain those nutrients is a little diminished within the drain soils. So we are seeing some of the nutrients, particularly the more micronutrients, like calcium, not necessarily micronutrient, being affected by drainage, and potentially these are nutrients that are getting leached from the soil profile and making their way into drainage outflow, perhaps. Although, as far as I know, these variables aren't. I don't know which one of these variables are being measured in drainage outflow. But so we do see some impact on nutrients, but again, nitrates, phosphates, no big change there. So just kind of wrapping up then, how has drainage impacted the soil health overall? Well, in general, these soils are fairly healthy. The big things, the nutrients are in a healthy range, and those are, of course, being augmented or supplemented with fertilization. Organic matter is still within that good normal range, although we've lost a couple of percentage, so we need to just kind of monitor that. And particularly the aggregate stability as well, want to continue to monitor that. Just point out that part of the purpose of including me in this project is to understand how controlled drainage impacts soil health differently than conventional drainage. And so drainage has not been managed, or was not managed prior to collecting the soil cores. So from the time the tile was installed to the time I cored, all the fields were essentially equally drained. So essentially the data I'm showing you today is that baseline data that we will now continue to monitor, hopefully continue to monitor soil health over time, and see how controlled drainage and conventional drained soils respond over time. And so currently seeking funding, have some LCCMR, Environmental Natural Resource Trust Fund grant pending, have a USDA grant proposal pending, so that we can continue to monitor soil health, incorporate that carbon mineralization potential going forward. And that's all I got for you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I have one question for you from the Q&A box. The question is, are you calculating the amount of organic material, I'm assuming, that is returned to the soil?
No, we don't have a way to easily quantify like the amount of, I assume the amount of vegetation that's remaining in the field, and then eventually.
Yeah, I think the question relates to that, probably, in terms of if you're growing a healthier crop, you might have more organic matter returning to the soil as well. Is there any way to quantify that within these measurements, or not really?
Not really. We're essentially just getting a total organic matter content within the soil itself, focused on the actual organic matter bound to the mineral particles. Now, if more organic matter from the vegetation is remaining in the field, you would assume that is going to make its way into the soil and account for any soil loss that organic matter loss you may have experienced as a result of drainage. So inputs minus outputs is essentially what we are monitoring. So we're not measuring the outputs per se, or the exact amount of soil lost other than percentage, and we're not monitoring the amount of direct organic matter that's being contributed, but essentially what we're looking at how much is added versus how much lost over time.
Okay. And then I had a question for you as well. Curious as to your hypotheses on how controlled drainage might impact some of these soil health properties compared to conventional drainage.
Sure. Well, my hypothesis is hopefully that control drainage can mitigate some of these issues, so that if we're keeping the water, maintaining the water level to a depth that is suitable for crop growth, but at the same time not removing too much water, that we can hopefully strike a right balance between drainage and aeration, so that the upper part of the profile is well aerated when we need it to be, and then we can, after harvest, kind of shut that off, hopefully prevent a little bit of organic matter loss, reduce, although, like I said, we haven't seen much nutrient loss, or at least certainly, compared to what Scott is seeing in the outflow, we are not seeing a big loss of the nutrients, the plant available nutrients within the soils. But my hypothesis is that we will, see improved soil health, or at least that I would expect that the conventionally managed soils are probably going to lose organic matter at a higher rate, that they might have a greater issue than with aggregate stability. And so that control drainage will hopefully mitigate some of those impacts.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mark, for your presentation today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep. And thank you all for attending today and spending time and asking some good questions. If you have more questions or want to connect with anyone featured on this webinar this morning, we invite you to reach out directly. A simple Google search, Farmamerica or Discovery Farms or Mark's Lab will lead you to more information and resources for you to contact. The recording for today's webinar will be uploaded to our Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center YouTube page within a couple of days. I will send out an email when that recording is up. Again, thank you to all of our project partners: Minnesota Agricultural Water Resource Center, Discovery Farms, Minnesota Department of Agriculture, Farmamerica, Minnesota State University Mankato, Prinsco, Ellingson Drainage, and the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service for your help with this project. So have a great day. Hopefully you can get outside and enjoy the spring weather before we get cold again. Thanks.